Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. Just getting ready for the Outsiders on the 27th of September 2015. This broadcast will be followed by First Dog on the Moon, we hope.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy, and you're not. Thank you so much, Barry. 21 to 10, your Outsiders this morning. James Carl. He's a researcher for democracyrenewal.edu.au. Gay Alcorn is the Melbourne editor for Guardian Australia. And Catherine McGovern is a senior associate at the Agenda Group. She's a former advisor to Nick Minchin back in the day when he was Minister for Industry, Science and Resources. Welcome.
Morning.
And they're all here, all in the one room. This is such a rare treat. Look, we know we have a new Prime Minister. We know that Tony Abbott has departed the scene. This was a little glimpse of his farewell, what is it, almost 2 weeks ago now.
We have more polls and more commentary than ever before. Mostly sour, bitter, character assassination. Poll-driven panic has produced a revolving door Prime Ministership, which can't be good for our country. And a febrile media culture has developed that rewards treachery.
Gay Alcorn, we read too on the weekend Tony Abbott making that exit interview to Paul Kelly at The Australian. This is his first sort of substantial statement since the speech we just heard. What's the game there for Tony Abbott? Why is he making that big interview now?
Well, I guess he had to do it at some point. And the interview that he did with The Australian, it seemed to me, I gave him a bit of slack there. He's obviously very, very bruised. And what he was saying was, it's my legacy that we're going to go to the election to as well, that the Prime Minister has been changed, but the policies are all mine, and they're good policies. Their border protection policies, their policies on climate change and so on. I think he's kind of kidding himself to a large extent, but at this particular moment, 2 weeks on, he is bruised and wants to at least say, my legacy is not nothing. Yeah. My legacy is important. I think that if you looked at it coldly, you'd have to say, give Turnbull time. It's only 2 weeks, and it's very unlikely that I think policy will shift.
Two weeks is a long time in an Australian Prime Ministership.
There could be another leader any time now, but I think policy will change, and I think it already has a little bit shift. And the other big issue that's fascinating that he did raise in that grab that you mentioned was the state of our politics generally, and the pressure, impossible pressure, I think, on someone like Turnbull to be the answer to that problem, and simply not a new leader.
Well, that's a complex problem. I mean, what are the other things in that, Catherine, in what Abbott was saying about, that policy is laid down? He's defying Turnbull to really make his stamp. He's laying down a bit of a marker there from the right to say to Turnbull, cross that, you're in trouble.
And I think one of the things I found fascinating about that article was the argument or the statement that none of my colleagues have been raising policy with me recently. Now, certainly, like for the last 2 years, and certainly since the 2014 budget, we've all been talking a lot in the media, in the public, in the Parliament about policy making.
If no one's raised it with Tony Abbott, we have a problem.
Well, yeah, and if you look at what's been coming out of Cabinet in terms of process in relation to the dual citizenship and whether you should strip people who are involved in terrorism, that's an issue of policy development. You look at policy content and the discussions around the 2014 and a variety of other initiatives. People have been raising this, and in a way that the former Prime Minister, couldn't possibly have missed.
So there's a bit of a sense there, James, of bubble, and the PM, I guess, inevitably inhabits a bit of one. But in the case of the Abbott Prime Ministership, it was a bubble very much supported by elements of the commentariat who were fiercely on side.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I wish I could channel David Marr right now with one of his wonderful extraordinaries. I found Abbott's comments extraordinary. Even the interview mentioning dealing with things that were banal observations, an obdurate Labour Party, a feckless Senate, a difficult media environment. How are these things different than anything that we've dealt with?
For anyone.
Yes,
yeah.
They're honestly, if I saw them in an undergraduate political science paper, I would say this is so banal and obvious, wouldn't even know why you would mention it.
Can I disagree? When yes, of course, there's been difficult media environments, and politics has always been impossible. And Abbott is kidding himself again if he actually thinks that the media is to blame for his demise. He wasn't. But there is at least a little bit of commentary now that if our politics is in serious trouble, and I think it is, and we can go into that if we want to, that the media can't pretend they've got no role in that. We can't also be part of this bubble that just goes on and pretends all we need is another leadership change and that will solve our problems. We've had 5 in 5 years or something. I do think the media it needs to have a look at our own role too as we criticise everyone else.
Catherine,
The media also has to be realistic about the fact that part of the media's role, whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, is actually to give the public what they want to listen to and what they want to read. I mean, that's actually about ratings, that's actually about reality, advertising and so forth. And if we look at what people want to read, they're clearly, at the moment, much more interested, and nobody's actually trying to engage them in a deeper discussion beyond some of the lack of substance or the spin over the substance.
See, I have a theory here that the way in which the media was a problem for Tony Abbott was in certain quarters, James, they were far too supportive of him.
Yes, I agree, Jonathan, that how can anyone doubt that the Murdoch papers and talk radio were not on the side of Abbott and his government. And this is actually a much more, this has been going on for quite some time in America, which has a much larger media infrastructure, but there effectively is an entire infrastructure that's tailored toward a particular ideological bent. And this includes, obviously, we all know about Fox News. America has its own talk radio and specialist magazines. Most major cities have a newspaper, and it just creates, if you don't step outside that bubble, if is the term you used, then you're just simply so detached from the general public, and you're meant there to represent all the people. And look, there's a bit of a fancy academic term for this called epistemological closure. Epistemology being the study of knowledge, and simply that you've chosen to, it's a choice you made. You've chosen to live in a closed information environment.
There's a key question there, isn't there, Catherine? Is whether, yes, that environment, that closed environment exists and it feeds back, but whether that represents something broadly in the population is kind of the key issue for a political leader. So if Tony Abbott's being told by the Alan Joneses, the Andrew Bolts and so forth, oh, rah, rah, these are the agenda items, and if they don't mesh with what we think, then he has a problem.
Yeah, and that's a problem, though, of leadership, isn't it? Of actually part of your responsibility as a politician, as a prime minister and so forth, is to actually go out and hear from a wide variety of people and actually engage. And I was always astonished with when John Howard was prime minister of his capacity to talk about what people were talking about barbecues.
He
and
had
actually
such
be
an
right.
ear, didn't he?
It was really quite a genuinely amazing skill that he must have practiced. But actually, we seem to be losing that, or people are getting into potentially a closed environment that they have to be careful to make sure that they go out and seek broader knowledge and broader ideas and broader engagement.
And I guess, Gay, there's a bit of Rudd in that as well. I mean, that sense of being a bit closed off from the world, of being out of touch, of believing your own circle of advice and influence. That's a real political trap.
Yes, it is. I mean, to take up your point, I mean, one of the criticisms about Rudd, I think, was that he was so, and in modern politics generally, was that he was so poll-driven and focus group-driven. Whereas with there's a view with the Abbott was that he was listening to far too much to people who were on the fringes, and this became part of an odd political debate we were having. When actually it's pretty clear that most Australians are very supportive of same-sex marriage. Most Australians do worry about fairness in budgets and so on.
And don't give a damn about AT&C or those things which are such big issues out there. I mean, fascinatingly, I mean, Andrew Bolt, who's one of the prime components of this feedback loop, wrote this week that re the rise of Turnbull, quote, "I should feel like Samson after a haircut." But here's the funny thing. We've actually won. Me and Alan Jones, we've house-trained Turnbull. How extraordinary. But, Catherine, that goes to our beginning point here of the invidious position for Malcolm Turnbull of being a little bit trapped on policy, of not being able to step too close to the centre lest he unleash these beasts of the right who will howl him down.
I think there's a whole variety of things for Malcolm. Malcolm's obviously in the last couple of weeks made some changes in portfolios and so forth that clearly show, as Gay was sort of referring to, some opportunities to make some changes in focus, make some changes in policy development and so forth. There are some things that the coalition went to the last election with that, in all honesty, it can't just walk away from. You can't walk away from huge chunks. It's been 2 weeks as well. You'd create, what would you create in its place? You actually have to go through the right process for change. And I think there will be some change. And I think that the new portfolios, the new ministry has really clearly indicated
it's
that.
astounding the difference that's been made very quickly, James, by just the difference in tone, the difference of way you talk about these issues. You talk about security, you don't talk about death cults.
Yes.
That makes such a big difference.
It clearly does. It seemed to me, the feeling I had was, it seemed like we had almost a divergence of the era that our prime minister was from and the era that we were living in, and the congruence just came back together again. Even regardless of your politics, it just seemed like, we have a prime minister who's of our time, even though ironically he's older than Tony Abbott.
And one of the big things that he's fixed on immediately is domestic violence.
We, as leaders, as a government, must make it, and we will make it, a clear national objective of ours to ensure that Australia is more respecting of women. Women must be respected. Disrespecting women is unacceptable.
And Gay, that's very much his focus, and the way he's trying to turn this conversation. It's all about gender equity. It's all about male respect for women in our culture.
Yes, that's how he's framing it. It should be remembered, I think, that the announcement he made on Thursday, the $100 million more, which was very welcome, was going to happen under Tony Abbott too. I mean,
Yes.
This has been an issue that's been under all sections of politics have been under pressure about, and this was going to happen anyway. But what the people involved, particularly the groups involved in domestic violence, were extremely pleased to see Turnbull's language, and they saw that as a real game changer breakthrough to frame and discuss domestic violence as a gender inequality issue. And you might think, oh well, that makes sense. That it is a gendered issue, but the activists in this area think that we have not acknowledged that enough. That we have not acknowledged that it's got to do with some broader question about respect for women in the whole culture. That it goes to do with sexist jokes and a sexist culture. The other argument is whether or not the sector is perhaps underplaying a little other factors that are so associated with domestic violence, whether they cause it or not, like entrenched poverty, like extreme abuse of alcohol in certain communities.
And this is where the conversation gets complex and slightly awkward. A column, Catherine, this morning from Miranda Devine dwells almost exclusively on that aspect. It says, look, you're not taking this seriously unless you admit that most of this violence is occurring in Aboriginal communities in the outer suburbs amongst an underprivileged underclass. It's a difficult conversation to have.
Yeah, it is. And I think Gay's made a good point. We've got to find the balance between the fact that most of this violence is perpetuated by men against women. That's a fact.
Number one. Yes.
But actually what's driving it, what's actually causing it, and some of it is some of the culture. And I think the money that's been put in this week is really fantastic. And the focus of that, of actually how do you change culture to avoid it. But we can't then just step aside from all of the other issues about, poverty, alcohol, drug abuse, and so forth.
It becomes part of this boring culture war, because Miranda Devine today is basically attacking the feminists. And that's really unfair, I think. It was feminists who put this issue on the agenda in the 70s. It was feminists who said we need women's refuges. The more subtle debate, I think, is whether or not gender equality is becoming the only thing we want to talk about here, rather than some of these more underlying issues, whether they're downplayed, I think.
And it's interesting, James, and almost the final point. I mean, that thing of culture war there, which is almost immediately but subtly is a thing which is starting to drift off. It now strikes you as slightly odd to see someone framing a conversation in that context.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we should take that as a sign of progress. In that even to culture war. Anytime you get culture war, you're actually inviting people to dig trenches and take sides. And I actually think they will fail at this. This is one bright spot in this otherwise rather dim subject and that they're trying to make progress in such a difficult area, is that there's such bipartisan support for this, which I think will help in terms of state and federal governments cooperating with each other, which are often the different parties, as we know, and as transitions between governments. That
Here we go, approaching the upload limit. I will return with First Moondog after a short break.